What happened?
Everywhere.
Was that blood everywhere? Good thing the video is not on.
If you're going to kill somebody, please mute your session. Okay, it's 8:05, so I think I will start. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the August Potpourri. First thing is please make sure you mute your session until you are either giving a presentation or asking a question. And tonight we have a full program. I'm very pleased to say we've got a lot of neat content, some presentations, and a lot of neat astrophotos. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of news, and then Simon has a continuation from July's presentation of just some postage stamps and covers from the early Apollo program. And then I thought I would just say a few words about the sky this autumn, because unfortunately we're getting very close to autumn. Sunset just after 8 o'clock tonight. This virtual C&E is opening, and I'm afraid that that's the beginning of the end. After a short break, we have some astrophotos, some presenters, some excellent photographers. Kirby, Alguire, Gary Crawford, and Brian Gibson are going to share with us some of their photos, and then I'm going to give a presentation on 3 solar eclipses, which we will be seeing in the next 3 years. So that's sort of a preview of things, given today is the 3rd anniversary of the August 21st, 2017 total solar eclipse. Believe it or not, time does pass quickly past. So let me just give a bit of background and some news. And the major news is that there's not much really to report. We're still deep into the COVID. We received an email from UTM the other day reminding us of all of our reserved meeting room times and dates. And then the email said, but you can't hold these meetings until we tell you. So until further information comes through, we will continue to hold virtual meetings. I'll start to look for a presenter for September. I think we should try to at least hold 1 meeting a month, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we could support 2 meetings a month virtually. If you feel strongly that we could, please let me know, and I'll volunteer you to organize one. We will have at least one meeting a month. We're having a council meeting next week, and that's one of the things I wanted to discuss with council is their thoughts on how the virtual meetings are going and what we should plan for the fall. Again, please mute your session. Thanks. I talked to Dave Taylor at Riverwood. Dave Taylor's been the education person there since I first did something at Riverwood 15 years ago. And he has retired. But with respect to...
You have a background for your Zoom meetings?
With respect to Riverwood star parties, we did talk about this via email amongst the council, and we could hold a limited participation star party from our point of view. Riverwood isn't ready for that yet, but we did talk about some of the conditions with that, and there would be limited number of people. It would have to be registration, by invitation or registration only. People would have to keep, the 2-meter distance, although it is difficult when someone comes up to your telescope and you're operating the telescope. Plus, there was some concern about people touching the telescope, even their, would each person contaminate the eyepiece? Would you have to sanitize the entire telescope in between each observation? And that really introduces a level of complexity that maybe makes it kind of futile to run the activity. So again, if you have any interests or any comments on that, please let me or let a council member know. Apart from that, there continues to be activity from the national office with regard to programming. A lot of different centers are promoting advertising their meetings online. It's just unfortunate that we can't get together to observe. So that's all I have for now. Are there any questions from anybody on any of this? Okay. All right, so I'd like to call on Simon to give his presentation on early Apollo program postage stamps and covers. Simon, it's all yours.
Okay, let's get this show on the road. Okay, the Saturn Apollo program of unmanned flights as told by postal history, plus some general history because I have to fill in some blanks. Okay, well, this all started because of Wernher von Braun. He's the fellow that developed the V2 for the Germans in World War II. Of course, when the Allies won and the Americans captured their German technology and invited their scientists to come to the US, much as Russia did the same with the other half. He came to the United States Army Ballistic Missile Center, started off in Texas, but ended up in White Sands, New Mexico, where they launched about 50 of the V2s that the Americans had brought over. After they used up the V2s, and they moved to Huntsville, Alabama, the Redstone Arsenal, and they started developing the Redstone rocket. Wernher von Braun plus about 100 of his engineers that he had brought with him, and they developed the Redstone rocket. That facility later became the George C. Marshall Space Flight Center, which is what it is today, a NASA facility. Redstone-Jupiter first launched in '53, and shortly after that, when they worked out some of the bugs with the Redstone project, von Braun was tasked with what's next. And what's next was making a rocket that could launch a sizable satellite into orbit. And they initially called this the Super Jupiter, but quickly it had a very anachronistic Army name to the project, so they internally called it Saturn, the next thing after Jupiter. So the Saturn project actually started in April of 1957. And this is prior to the beginning of the space age in October of that year when Sputnik was launched. Now, for the Americans, the Vanguard project was what was trying to launch the American first orbital satellite. But of course, it had a number of interesting problems that caused it not to launch. So President Eisenhower asked von Braun if he could launch the satellite. And of course, he said he could. So they retasked the Redstone-Jupiter and launched Explorer 1 in 1958. And of course, another variant of Redstone, the Mercury Redstone, is what launched the first 2 American astronauts. So here's MR3, Freedom 7, Shepard in May of '61. Exactly 20 days later, President Kennedy announced the goal that the Americans were going to land someone on the moon within the decade. And then, of course, in July, Grissom went up in Liberty Bell 7. But that was in May '61, the task of going to the moon. 5 months later, von Braun launched Saturn Apollo 1, which was essentially considered a Block 1 configuration of the Saturn I booster. It contained 8 H1 rocket engines. The H1 was the engine that powered the Redstone. So this had 8 Redstone rockets in its base. It developed a total force of 1,500,000 pounds force. And it launched just as a Saturn I stage. It had a dummy second stage and a dummy third stage. Shortly after that, in February, the Mercury program went to orbital launches and switched to the Mercury Atlas. So this is MA6, which is Glenn's flight. Von Braun launched another Saturn Apollo, number 2, in April of '62. Again, just the main stage, dummy second and third stages. You notice the third stage was considered Saturn V dummy. The original project had 5 stages, Saturn 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But Saturn V actually never got out of this Block 1 configuration. It wasn't required in the end. So Saturn V became the name of the entire moon rocket. Now on the second flight, they decided to see what water vapor would do to the radio communications and tracking by ground radar of the rocket. So they released 22 or nearly 23,000 gallons of water, and apparently it didn't have much effect. We then had MA7 and MA8 of Carpenter-Schirra's flight in May and October of '62. And then I finally got my first cover. I have yet to find covers for SA1 and 2, so this is SA3. SA3 was launched in November of '62. It's a duplicate of SA2 in that it also released a lot of water to test the interference with radio communications and ground-based radar. And again, all these were successful. Then we had in March of '63, SA4. I can't see my own text here. Yeah, we had a dummy 2 stages again. Now this was strictly a launch. There was no other payload. It was basically just testing the engines. And then we had the last Mercury flight, Cooper, in May of '63. This flight was also the last flight of the Block 1 configuration. Block 2. called the AS-100 series of flights. The first stage was still 8 of the Redstone rockets, but now they had developed the second stage, Saturn IV, and it had 6 smaller rockets, and the total force of the stage 4 was 9,000 foot-pounds, or 90,000 foot-pounds. So SA-5, launched in January of '64, was the first launch of the Block 2. And it lifted 37,000 pounds into orbit. And this was the largest payload. And it was at this point that the Americans figured they had finally surpassed the Soviets. They were the first to launch a heavy orbital payload. Then SA-6 in May of '64, and the second stage was used, and the third stage was a boilerplate of the Apollo spacecraft. Essentially, it was just a structural frame with the escape tower, so that they could launch a Saturn I with a second stage with the mass of the Apollo command module and service module. And there's another cover for SA-6, right? And it just orbited for 50 orbits and then disintegrated over the Pacific. SA-7. Now this was another boilerplate launch. However, this satellite had the ability to come down safely, so it had parachutes installed, even though it was just a boilerplate stage. The only thing that was active was the heat shield and parachutes. Now you notice here they didn't quite have an image of Apollo for the cover, so they used good old Mercury capsule as the Apollo spacecraft. Now there's a few covers in my gap here, so I don't have SA-8, 9, or 10. These were all boilerplate 2 with essentially an Apollo boilerplate stage. However, there was also a satellite included, and it launched these 3 launches launched satellites. At the same time, in March of '65, we start the Gemini program. So we have Gemini 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in 1965. Now they start moving up in the capabilities of the Saturn program. This is the AS-200 series of flights. Saturn IB is essentially the same, although the engines have been constantly improving. So it's now up to 1,600,000 pound force. And we have the Saturn IVB, version B of the Saturn IV, using one J2 engine, but this one engine develops 200,000 pounds force. And that's a later image of a Saturn IB launch. Now, for Astrophotos, this is Apollo 1. Because it was the first launch of the capsule and command module, the CSM. Oh, I can't see that. Oops. Okay.
It's 9.
Anyway, first
CSM-009.
09, good. Yeah, it's just off my screen, unfortunately. So this is. It re-entered, so it had the heat shield and parachutes, and it, as you can see from the map below the Apollo program name, it landed just south of, or just around Ascension Island, east of the easternmost coast of South America. So that was Apollo 1. This is another Apollo 1 cover from Cape Canaveral. Heat shield and landing. And this is the USS Jonas Ingram, which was the recovery vessel, along with several others, but this was the prime vessel. So again, the first Apollo unmanned flight. Then we have Apollo 2. Well, instead of a suborbital, it now becomes an orbital mission. Again, still launched with a Saturn IB. It's using a boilerplate because it's not a complete service module and command module. It's simply testing the rocket systems and the use of multiple firings of the engine. And we also have at this time Gemini 10. Then we have Apollo 3. Again, a fully equipped Apollo spacecraft. Again, another suborbital flight, a little longer in flight duration, in that it lands in the Pacific, not far from Hawaii. And at the same time, we have Gemini 11 and the last Gemini flight, Gemini 12. So now we're up to the November 1966. So now they start developing the full Saturn V configuration. AS500 is the series. And we now move up a stage. The Saturn I stage is now C, Saturn 1C. It uses 5 F1 rocket engines, developing a total motive force of 7,500,000 foot-pounds. Now there's a second stage, Saturn II. It's using 5 J2 engines. Again, 1,000,000 foot-pounds of force. And the Saturn IV stage has still got its 1 J2, but they've improved its performance. So it's now up to 225,000 foot-pounds. Now, unfortunately, before these things were ready for flying, we had the fire on January 27th, 67, with the Apollo Command Service Module number 12. And this caused the death of Grissom, Chaffee, and White, and delayed the program for a bit. But Apollo Saturn IV did launch in November of that year with the first launch of the Saturn 1C, Saturn II, and the improved Saturn 4B, and had a service module, I think it's number 11, or 17, sorry. I can't quite see the last digit there. Okay, that's a Cape Canaveral cancel, and now another Cape Canaveral cancel of the Apollo 4. And it shows the launch from the new facilities. You see the vehicle assembly building in the background of that graphic, and launching from pad A, 39A, which was where the Apollo 5 Saturn shots were lifted off from. And we have Apollo 5 launched. Now this is back to the 200 series. It's only now, the first stage is 1B and the second stage is 4B. And this is the first flight of the lunar landing module, LEM-1. Now it's fully automatic. This launch is strictly to test the ability of the LEM to fire its engines several times. So both the descent engine was fired, turned off, and fired again. Then the LEM separated, and the ascent stage fired its engine first once and then twice. So this proved that the LEM engines performed properly and were able to be turned off and turned on. And in the case of the descent engine, could be variably powered. They could have changed the force of the engine. And then we have the last of the unmanned Saturn flights, Apollo 6. This launched in, it was the second unmanned full stage, Saturn 1C, 2, and 4B, and CSM-20, I believe. And they called it the Flying Skyscraper, a cancel from Patrick Air Force Base. And we have the recovery of the AS-502 Saturn Apollo 6. And if you remember my last talk, Apollo 13, it was the Okinawa that recovered the capsule. Well, it was also the Okinawa that got experience recovering the capsule from Apollo 6. The next flight, of course, is A7, SA-205, which is Apollo 7, and that's a topic for next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. If you like this talk, you can go down to reactions and either give him a thumb up or an applause. I don't think there's a way that you can give any other reaction, but thanks very much. Yeah, it's interesting. Kennedy was supposed to see that Saturn launch that launched early in '64, but it ended up being the first rocket launched from Cape Kennedy.
Yes.
Randy, do we have time for a couple questions?
Certainly, yeah.
That was really great, Simon. I wasn't even aware that those types of postcards were used throughout the space program. How rare are those? Like, how hard would it be for somebody to try to put together a complete collection?
Okay, well, you notice the first cover I had was SA3, and that was in excess of $100 to get. And at the same time, you remember, this was the height of the Mercury program. So all of the cachet makers focused on, you know, the first flight with Shepard and the first orbital flight with Glenn, and I have hundreds of those covers. But the experimental flights, because all of these 16 Saturn Apollo flights were all experimental. They were testing various components, either the first stage or the fourth stage or the LEM or the command and service module, and numerous engine and instrumentation packages to just characterize the performance of the rocket. Did it do everything properly? They even simulated faults, i.e. they would, during launch of the Saturn I, they would turn off engines. And could it still achieve its orbital parameters, losing some of its thrust? And of course it could. And of course in later launches, this proved to be useful because engines did shut down unexpectedly. So it was an interesting program. There's I pulled together about probably 3,000 pages of NASA documentation, all covering just the Saturn program and these development issues. And I tried to synthesize it so that I could talk about the covers and give you some useful information. But finding the early covers, especially before the manned flights, is a challenge.
I can imagine. And it looked like a lot of them were postmarked right at the Cape. So I imagine that was some kind of a souvenir you could buy, where you buy the postcard, you give them the address, and included in the price is the stamp, and it gets mailed from there as something special. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, most of the cachet makers, that's the people who produce the graphics on the cover, would have subscription services. So for instance, you notice the last cover was from Dr. Vanier up here in Canada. Well, he subscribed to a service in Virginia, or sorry, in New Jersey. And he, the New Jersey maker would send blank envelopes down to his agent in Florida, and he would take the covers to either the Cape Canaveral post office or the Patrick Air Force Base post office. And later, of course, when the Kennedy Space Center opened, the Kennedy Space Center post office. And he would hand in covers. The post office would run them through their machine, so they could do probably 20 covers a minute. And then he would hand the covers back, and the guy would then send them off to his dealer in New Jersey, who would then mail them in packages to his subscription service. So most of this was done that way. Very few as an individual, you could, I suppose, send it to the postmaster at Cape Canaveral and ask him to take the envelope that was inside, cancel it on the day of, and put it in the mail back to you. But most of it was done by agents.
That's great. Thanks, Simon.
I should
Simon,
say, just to add to that, all the shuttle missions that I attended, they had a big box in the press dome. And you would buy the envelopes with the nice cachet on it and put your address on it and put a stamp on it and put it in the box. And then they would mail it for you when the shuttle actually took off. So if they scrubbed it, they would hold on to them. And they'd put the right postmark on when the thing finally went. Alan?
yeah, Simon, I noticed at least one of them, the stamp was FDR. So in general, does it matter what the stamp is?
Well, these are not first day stamp covers. There was
Right.
no stamps issued for the Saturn Apollo program until Apollo 11. Then you had that famous Man on the Moon stamp.
Right.
So these are all called event covers. So we're celebrating the event, which is the launch of the Saturn V rocket. So they would use whatever stamps were available. Now you notice quite often they use the Mercury program stamp, and that's on at least 3 or 4 of the covers that I did show, as that was the only space-related stamp that was available at that time. So yeah, they're not first-day covers; they're event covers.
And from a valuation standpoint, would the stamp affect the valuation?
No.
No? Okay.
No, it's just a legitimate cover. It's got, what's important on the cover is the postmark.
Okay.
So it must be postmarked the nearest day possible. So for instance, some of the rocket launch sites, the launches were on a Sunday, no post office. So canceled on the following Monday morning. AM cancels the next day are completely acceptable because that was the earliest the United States Postal Service would give you a cancel.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks again, Simon. That was great.
Good. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me share the screen. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in the sky this autumn. And I think I'm just going to run into my second presentation about the solar eclipses, just because I have the screen. And then we'll take a short break, and then we'll have our astrophotographers come on board. So I thought we should have an observing presentation. What's going on this autumn? Well, the main thing that's going on is this planetary festival where you've got 5 planets all in the sky at once, the 3 brightest ones and the 3 most interesting ones in my mind, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, all in the sky at the same time. And then you can test your star hopping skills to find Uranus and Neptune. So this is a rather good opposition for Mars, coming to opposition on October 6th. It's a little farther away than the opposition 2 years ago. These oppositions are 2 years, 2 months apart approximately. As we'll see in a minute, Mars's orbit is such that we get some really good oppositions when Mars is rather close and appears rather large, not as big as the full moon, unfortunately. But that's an internet scam that's going on at this time of year. But it is reasonable compared to the really good opposition that we had in 2018. So if you were going to look at the apparent size of Mars in 2020, then, you know, obviously here's right when COVID started, by the way. Mars does, as we in our orbit approach and pass Mars on an inside track, the apparent diameter and phase changes. And it's really best around opposition when we're at the minimum distance. And October 6th, when you get a nice full Mars and gives you the best opportunity to see detail. So here are the two orbits of Earth and Mars, and you can see that the Earth looks nearly circular, so same distance from the Sun. It's a little elliptical, but Mars is very elliptical. So generally what happens with an opposition, like here we are in 2018, so by the time we go around once to July 2019, Mars has already moved in its orbit along the way over here. So it takes us another year and a bit to catch up to Mars for an opposition. And so if we go back in time a little bit, 2014 was 53 million miles away, whereas the 2021 is 38 million miles. And in this area, when Mars is at its farthest point from the Sun, even though we're as close as we can possibly get to Mars at this point, it's still 62 million miles compared to 38 million miles. So there's a period of time, it's really every 18 years, we get a good opposition of Mars where we're in the order of 34, 35 million miles. But then we have to put up with some not so good oppositions in between. Jupiter and Saturn right now are in the same area of the sky, and on December 21st, they're going to appear so close that if you can get them in an eyepiece, you'll be able to see something like this. They'll only be 6 arc minutes apart. So 6 arc minutes is about 20% of the apparent diameter of the moon. If I got my math right. Yeah, 1/5 of the moon diameter. And that will be quite unique. Jupiter is on an inside orbit compared to Saturn, and it catches up to Saturn approximately every 18 years or so. This is a rare event. And it will be observable. This is just after sunset on December 21st. And so with just at 4:45 in the evening. So with a nice low horizon, you should be able to observe Saturn and Jupiter. You see they're so close together, they just show up as one star there. So that should be an observable event. The other event this year that isn't local is the total solar eclipse in South America. And this is kind of unique because just a year and a half ago, I know several people who are on this call tonight saw the eclipse in 2019 and even are planning to go to the 2020 event, although I know that some tours have already canceled for 2020. So hopefully people with reservations will be able to make it. So that's kind of unique to have 2 solar eclipses within a year and a half of each other in the same general area. So this sort of goes into my next talk, which is eclipses that we're going to be able to see in the next 3 years. And if you want to plan North American total solar eclipses for the rest of your life, here you go. So the last one 3 years ago today was along here through the US. And we're looking forward to one in just under 4 years, going up through the Great Lakes and through Canada. Some of these others, I'm not sure we're going to make it, but yeah, a lot of these are maybe a little bit beyond. Here's that 2008 eclipse that was in the far north. So it means you're probably going to have to travel off of North America to see some eclipses in the next 20 years. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some solar eclipses over the next 3 years, 3 or 4 years, in 2021, 2023, and 2024. So here is a map of US and Canada, Mexico. And again, just a reminder, many of us were along this path 3 years ago today. And unfortunately, many of us, I think all, I don't know if anyone in the club was clouded. Was there anyone in the club that was clouded up? I don't know of anyone. But anyway, here's the path that millions of people were along that path 3 years ago today. There is a solar eclipse next year in June in northern Ontario. It's not a total eclipse, it's a central eclipse, meaning the moon is passing over the center of the moon is passing over the center of the sun, but it's an annular eclipse because the moon will be at its far point in its orbit and it won't be large enough to cover the entire sun. But it is the first annular eclipse in Ontario since May of 1994. So here's another map showing not only the 2021 eclipse, but there is also a 2023 eclipse, annular eclipse, going through the United States in October 2023. So again, the moon it won't be a total solar eclipse, it'll be an annular, and the moon will, when it's central on the sun, it will leave a ring or annulus. And then here is the one that many of us are looking forward to on April 8th, 2024, which is coming very, very close to home. All right, so here's the track of the 2021 eclipse. And it's an interesting path. It's very, very wide because the sun is very, very low. And if you project a circle on a globe, then it becomes an ellipse, it becomes spread out. So that's the main reason. The sun is very, very low for this entire eclipse. It's really well, the sun will rise in northern Ontario here in the annular phase. And then it quickly goes over not a lot of populated area through the northern part of Baffin Island and Greenland. I know some people have been thinking about being somewhere along here to see the sunrise with the annular phase, but there's a lot of talk about it's so forested that it'd be very difficult to find a nice low horizon. Plus, I think the mosquitoes are about the size of Buicks up there, so that might be another concern. So here is a view that I kind of like, shows the path of the eclipse, and you see that it doesn't really get very far away from the terminator, and in fact it looks like it goes right across the North Pole. So I don't know the last time there was an annular or total eclipse over the North Pole, but that definitely looks like one. This next one gives you kind of an idea of why it's such a curve. This is the view from the sun, and imagine the moon passing in its orbit this way, and its shadow passing along the Earth, but because it's curved and near the edge of the globe, that results in a very wide curved path. So I'm not sure if we're going to be heading up to see that one. You've got to be very devoted to travel to outreached areas to see an annular eclipse. They're great when they're nearby. You can drive to it maybe. Many people here saw an annular eclipse down, say, in Arizona years ago. But I'm not sure about this one. But it will be worthwhile to get up early on June 10th, 2021, because this is sunrise for us at 5:40 in the morning. And it will be quite a spectacular crescent sun rising. Probably, I don't know where the best place to do this would be. Maybe go down by the lake and try to get a nice low horizon. But that'll be something that definitely we will want to take in. The next eclipse of the three is another annular eclipse through the United States on October 14th, 2023. And again, it's through a populated area, going down through Oregon and down through Texas and some of the western states there, some of the very picturesque states. So if we can enter the states by then, it's something that you can easily fly to or you can drive to. Here's a view of the path of annularity and the extent of the partial phases away from the path. Vancouver, Victoria should get an 85, 75, 80% eclipse. So that should be good. All of Canada essentially sees something. So it'll be an opportunity to promote astronomy and sell some solar viewers and that kind of thing. Here in Mississauga, it's not going to be all that spectacular. That's about the maximum phase at about 1:30 in the afternoon on Saturday, October 14th, 2023. But it'll be an opportunity to see another eclipse, and they're always fun to watch. So this gives you an idea of the population centers for these North American eclipses. And you can see for 2017, there were some rather large cities that were in the path of totality. Not much in 2023. But for 2024, there are some rather large cities that are in or near the path of totality, meaning Dallas and Detroit and of course Toronto and Montreal. So this after the 2017 eclipse, this is going to be another big one. So here's the path through Mexico, through the United States, and then through 6 provinces, I think, if I counted right, or maybe 5. So the path goes through some major centers in Texas, like Dallas and Austin, Fort Worth. As it approaches the Great Lakes, passes through Indianapolis, Cleveland, Toledo, and Buffalo. On the north shore of Lake Ontario, misses some larger cities like London and Kitchener, Waterloo, and Guelph. And I think I have a nice zoom of this. Yeah, there we go. So what is going to happen on this eclipse? Well, it's going to be total in Hamilton and part of Burlington. So depending on where you live, you may be on the in the path of totality. Rochester, Buffalo, Niagara Falls, Hamilton, all are in totality. The northern limit of totality goes out over the lake around Burlington, Oakville area, and doesn't come back until out here near maybe Bowmanville or east of Bowman. So we will not get a total eclipse where we are. But we will get a 99.8% eclipse. This is what I would see from my driveway if I was on my driveway during that partial eclipse. So for Toronto, there's a very good chance that they will see a diamond ring that will actually start on one side and rotate to the other with potential corona. But 99% isn't 100%. So it will unfortunately not be total. So the eclipse continues to the northeast. So Belleville and Kingston are in the path. Cornwall. Northern limit goes right through Montreal. Passes south of Ottawa, Trois-Rivières, Quebec. Moves through the northeast U.S. into New Brunswick, and Fredericton, and is in the path, as well as well, looks like Moncton just misses it. Then it passes over the northern part of PEI, and then out over Newfoundland. So it passes through quite a few provinces. The last time a total eclipse went through Toronto was January 24th, 1925. And this is a page out of a report that C.A. Chant made in the journal. And I think his first sentence pretty well says it all. And that is, it was pretty well a cloud out. It was clear in New York City, and there's a story about how astronomers were able to refine their predictions of where total solar eclipses would be, because along all the streets in New York, there were people stationed, and they reported on whether or not they saw totality or not. And from that, they were able to get an accurate limit of totality. But there were a lot of experiments set up by Canadian U of T astronomers for the 1925 eclipse, but unfortunately, it was clouded out. The RASC has created a total solar eclipse task force, of which I am chairing. And the objectives are pretty straightforward: to distribute information to the public about observing the eclipse, emphasizing safety, and also correcting disinformation. To provide information to municipalities along the eclipse path to help prepare them for the eclipse. There's a lot of data from the 2017 eclipse that has been published on good practices for municipalities based on what worked and what didn't work for the 2017 eclipse. So, we tend to contact all the cities that are within the path of totality or near the path of totality just to warn them what they can expect. To provide information, support materials to RASC centers, not those just along the path or near it, but across the country, because again, it will be a partial eclipse everywhere outside of the path. And to build an information network to supply information and contacts to the media. So this task force is relatively new. If anyone is interested in participating on it, please let me know. The main thing that we're trying to do is to inform people how to observe the eclipse safely. So make sure you use your filters. Any questions? Okay, if not,
Randy.
Yeah.
It's Dennis here.
Hi.
Any views of historical views of weather patterns in April? I mean, around that time, what would we expect? A lot of cloud cover, 50% chance in our area.
One of the people on the task force is Jay Anderson, who has been accumulating weather data for eclipses for at least 30 years now. And so he has all that information. I believe it has been published. To tell you the truth, Dennis, the numbers don't come to mind. Maybe some other people on the call here remember. But I think the chances of seeing something in a perfectly clear sky from here is low. The chances of seeing something are not too bad. But I have some friends in Bowmanville who are going to stay in their backyard, because how often does a total eclipse come through your backyard? But if you want to give yourself a better chance of seeing it, then probably farther down the eclipse path into the southern US would be a better place to go. We were at an eclipse in New Guinea several years ago where we had a 20% chance of seeing anything. And it was perfectly clear that day. So there are perfectly clear days in April. And, I have seen a total eclipse in a totally overcast sky. And it is amazing. You don't see the detail of the sun, but the light changes are really quite unbelievable. So, not that you want to see a totally overcast eclipse. I'm not saying that at all. But I don't know if Chris, do you have any comments on this?
I've been planning for this for several years, like I do for most total. Let me close my door. Like I do for most total eclipses. I'm sure somewhere in Canada from Lake Erie all the way to Montreal, somewhere there it's bound to be clear. It's highly unlikely that all of that will be clouded out. Weather forecasts become very accurate 48 hours before the date I'm planning to go to the Niagara Peninsula the day before the eclipse. If the weather looks bad, we drive all night, you know, all the way to Point Pelee, or we drive all the way to New Brunswick. That's doable in 24 hours. So I would really like to see this from Canada. My issue is I'm going to have grandchildren. At that time, they'll be 9, 10, and early teens. I'd love to see it with them, and it's a logistics thing for me. But certainly it's doable in Canada, and that's where I'd love to observe it from.
Anyone else? Questions, comments on that?
Yeah, Randy, you were talking about the, you know, from Toronto, an observer from there would be like 99.9% total. I've seen a couple of eclipses. I'm trying to remember when it was almost totality. If the corona was starting to become visible, or do you have to get all the way to 100% to see any of the corona? I just couldn't quite remember.
You can see the corona at about 99%. We saw corona during an annular, a very extreme annular eclipse in '84. But it's generally, if it's your first eclipse, it's unless you've seen one and know what the diamond ring looks like and how long the diamond ring takes and all that, you know, generally you're told keep your solar filters on until it's 100%. If you are at the extreme northern limit of an eclipse, but just outside, then what you will see is a diamond ring at the 9 o'clock position. And as the moon moves from right to left, the diamond ring will begin to move up to the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock position, and then go down to the 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock position, and then grow again. So during that point, when the diamond ring is at the top, you should be able to cover it with your hand or whatever and see the corona below. But that's asking a lot of someone who's seeing their first.
Randy?
Yeah.
I think that would be very spectacular to see a 99.5%. But I think afterwards you'd be bitterly, bitterly disappointed that you didn't just go a few kilometers more and see the corona really blow way out and be beautiful. Like you'd be kicking yourself. Like, why didn't I go just that extra little bit?
Probably because you couldn't leave the cat. So.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I totally agree with that. I was just wondering about people that, you know, never seen one and don't think that 99% is good enough, you know, what their experience is going to be like.
Yeah, it's going to be quite something. But for, you know, anyone who's seen a total eclipse, I think it would be a disappointment. I mean, in the past, there have been, I know of people who have always gone to the limit of an eclipse path, and because they think it's a spectacular thing to see. So,
yeah, but Randy, the limit would mean 99.9%, like 2 kilometers outside of the path, not like 15 kilometers. You need like almost 100%. Then it's spectacular, but it's very short. Like, that would be beautiful. Yes.
Yeah.
Somebody damaged the headphones. Somebody damaged 2 pairs of headphones.
Randy?
Yeah.
If they can get 800, if we can get 800 people out to Riverwood for a partial, that could be a bit of a challenge because there's going to be a lot of local demand. Some people are going to want to stay here to the point that was just made. If you can drive 40 or 60 kilometers to get reality, most of us are going to, I mean, I love what Chris said. I've sort of been thinking about Texas, and then Chris came out sounding extraordinarily nationalist, and now I feel badly about that. Maybe better to drive for 24 hours. But it's going to be kind of weird because a lot of folks are not going to want to stay here when you can drive down to Welland, Ontario and get the full show.
Yeah, no, I've definitely thought about that. And, you know, all the centers across the country had problems in 2017 like we did, where the number of people were 10 times larger than what it was expected. And they were low on volunteers because a lot of people had gone to the center line. So it's definitely a concern. And we're going to have to think long and hard about it. you know, the Riverwood is still, I hear stories that the city is angry with Riverwood for allowing 3,000 people on the property. Because that actually could have been bad with medical problems or whatever.
Presumably that will be part of your education campaign for this.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Definitely.
And getting out to media, right? Don't go in your local neighborhood. Go somewhere down here.
Yeah. No,
somewhere in the totality.
Randy, it's Beulah here.
Hello.
Just wondering, I came on late. So have you seen a total eclipse?
Yes, I have.
Okay. When was this and where?
Oh, the last one was in Idaho for 3 years ago today.
Oh, wow. Nice.
But there's some. Chris, how many have you seen?
How many? Many have seen?
16 total eclipses.
Wow.
Chris has seen 16. I've seen 12.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've seen 2 in Canada, so that's pretty nationalistic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Leslie and Sheila have seen quite a few.
Yeah, that's right.
Seen 6.
Okay. Leslie?
6.
6, okay. They are addictive. Yeah, so once you see one.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So with the vision, the radiation and all that, so is it neutralized when it's full, or is it maximally detrimental?
The sun does not change when it's partially eclipsed. So
okay. No, I'm talking about full. I'm talking about full eclipse.
Then the sun's totally covered, and the corona is about as bright as the full moon, and the stars and planets come out, and
right.
It's not midnight in the middle of the day. It's like a deep twilight.
Okay.
But but the change from daytime to nighttime or dusk happens very quickly. Right. It's very emotional.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But you're safe to look. You're safe to look at it when it's fully a total eclipse.
Uh-huh.
It's not unnatural for a group of people, especially the ones who've seen their first one, to start applauding after the eclipse. It's just a natural thing. It's quite emotional.
Just a comment. The word corona has taken on a new meaning now.
Yes. Yes, Corona beer is required. Yes, or maybe we'll call it the COVID. All right. Okay, that's good. Let's just take a. It's 9:06 now. Let's take a 3 or 4 minute break, and then I'll ask Kirby to set his presentation up, and we'll start again at 9:10.
Okay. Thank you.
See, there's a nice little crescent moon out there. You can look out to the west. Wendy's got a vision. Seem to have a bright light coming from your left side.
I turned the light on, otherwise you wouldn't see me.
Oh, okay.
Oh, maybe that's
Alan's
good.
looking good. What the hell are you doing?
Sorry?
What are you doing?
I'm eating.
He's got this light source.
It's a flashlight.
Oh, okay. It does weird things to your visual.
Yep. Whereas Wendy's in the dark. Oh, okay. I was going to say Wendy's in the dark. There's an iridium. It's an iridium flare.
Yes, definitely. Right, Kirby, when you're ready, sir.
Okie dokie, let me just get sharing here. Okay. Can you guys see that okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So yeah, just a few slides on Comet NEOWISE. You know, this was a pretty big deal. I think this was probably arguably one of the best comets in the Northern Hemisphere, probably for going on 24, 25 years, although maybe I'm forgetting a couple. I was out in North America for a big chunk of that time. I know there were a couple of amazing comets in the Southern Hemisphere that weren't very visible from Canada in the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years. But I think for me, at least in North America, you need to go back to about 1996. This was Comet Hyakutake on March 22nd. And I shot this one with, some of you might remember, Tri-X Pan black and white film. And I shot this with an OM1 camera and a 200mm lens. But that was a popular film for astrophotographers back in the day. But Hyakutake was phenomenal. It had an incredibly long tail. This photo doesn't do it justice, but it was a beautiful comet. And then just about a year later, we got blessed with a second one, Comet Hale-Bopp. Many of you will remember both these comets. This one was I took this shot on April 1st, 97, also with film camera. This time with Super G 400 slide film. Sounds so antiquated nowadays. I had the camera piggyback on an SCT, and the 8-inch SCT was tracking, but you know, guiding back in those days was a big deal, and I didn't really know how to do it. So clearly my 40-second exposure still caused a bit of trailing. But this was a spectacular comet. This was very bright, not as long a tail maybe visually as Hyakutake a year earlier, but phenomenally sharp and bright. I think I can remember almost seeing the ion tail visually, and certainly it was easy to see with binoculars. So that was a fantastic comet. But the comet this year was NEOWISE, and discovered on March 27th with a satellite called NEOWISE, the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, short form WISE space telescope. And at the time that it was discovered, it was about, I think I missed a letter here, that should say 18th magnitude. And it was about 2 astronomical units away, about twice the distance from the Earth to the Sun, at about 300 million kilometers when the satellite discovered it. And at that time, it was a little bit closer to Earth than it was away from the Sun, at about 1.7 million AUs, or 1.7 AUs, or about 250 million kilometers. And then it kind of zoomed in, and it's a very parabolic orbit that goes way out into the Oort cloud. And so its closest approach was on July 3rd, 2020. That's the closest approach to the Sun, called Perihelion. And at that point, it got about 0.29 astronomical units from the Sun, which is very close, 43 million kilometers or so. And they estimate that, the astronomers estimate that oncoming into the inner solar system, it was on a period of about 4,400 years for its orbit. But they believe that now that it passed so close to the sun had an enormous impact on its orbit, and it is now even much more parabolic than it was before. And so they're expecting 6,700 years before it will be back again. And so I'm guessing probably most of us are not going to pick up Comet NEOWISE for a second time in our life. So then this is the path just after perihelion and through the whole month of July. And so its closest approach to Earth was actually on about July 23rd. At that point, it was about 0.69 astronomical units away from Earth, or about 103 million kilometers, and in the constellation Ursa Major. And hopefully most of us got out to see it or had a chance to observe it, because it was a pretty cool. I think most of our club members started talking about it and catching it in the early morning of the early days of July. And that's kind of when my first of kind of six sightings of it started. But before I show you my photos, I have to thank you, Randy, for putting me before Gary and Brian. Those two guys are amazing with their photography. So I'm going to show you my pictures, and then those guys can show you how it's really supposed to be done. So you got the order right on the agenda, Randy. So this was my first shot at it. It was July 5th, early morning around 4:30 in Oakville. And that was my first sighting of it. It had not become an evening target just yet. Then a few days later on the 9th, I tried to get a shot of it over the Toronto skyline. So I went down to Jack Darling Park in Mississauga. And the struggle that day was there was a lot of low-lying cloud over the city. And it took a long time for the comet to kind of rise up out of that and become visible enough. It just took too long. So by the time that it kind of cleared the clouds, risen up and cleared the clouds, the sun was coming on real strong. It was probably 5:15, way too late, really. But I did catch it here just faintly and managed to get a telephoto on it and get a little bit brighter close-up image of it. But did capture it over the skyline. Just didn't get quite what I was hoping. I was hoping I would catch it down here in a darker sky. That will have to be another time. Then on July 12th was my third catch of it. This was my first evening sighting, also from Oakville, just north on Carding Mill Trail in Oakville. Not a great shot. It was very, very murky and very, very humid kind of night that night. But it did prove to me that yes, it had shifted closer to the circumpolar stars in the north and had become an evening object visible at a much more humane time of day than 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning. The next night was much better conditions, much drier air, much better seeing and clarity, and much less humidity. And so this one was also taken from Burnham Thorpe Road in Oakville, and got managed to get a longer tail with this 15-second guided exposure or tracking exposure. A little bit closer up with a 400 millimeter and a different setting for the sky background to give it a kind of a blue sky, but much nicer environment to take the photos, but still very much in an urban environment. A few days later, I started a vacation at Charleston Lake, which is not far from Kingston, and that got me into cottage country down there and much darker skies. And so this shot was a 15-second exposure. And I was, I think this one was just on a fixed tripod, so I had to use a fairly high ISO, but I wanted the trees to be sharp, and so I didn't really want to track it in this particular case. But you can start to see faintly the ion tail coming here beside it, and the length of the tail really was quite phenomenal on NEOWISE for sure. So that was my first shot there in a dark sky country. That same night, I took this Milky Way shot. This is the bay that my cottage was on, and went down in the dock and realized that the Milky Way was stretching all the way down the bay out to the bigger part of the lake, of Charleston Lake down here. So it was pretty cool. So I took this shot and captured Jupiter and Saturn here blazing away on the left side of the photo. Struggled a little bit with this one because I took it with the fisheye lens, 15 millimeter. This is just a single frame with a little bit of processing in PSC. It's not a great way to do it. I struggled a little bit on a single frame to catch the detail of the Milky Way, but without way overexposing the zillions of lights that cottagers seem to think they need on their property all the time. But did the best I could with it. But you know, Gary's been helping me with some thoughts for next time around, you know, doing some stacking on the Milky Way and then exposing for the foreground separately with a much shorter exposure and then combine those. So I'm gonna try that next time I have an opportunity like this. And then really my last really good opportunity was a few nights later, same lake from a tiny island across from my uncle's house, July 20th. And this is about 4.5 minutes total. This is 18 15-second shots at ISO 3200 and a 400mm lens. And this is on a tracker. So this is a stack of 18 shots to get a total of 4.5 minutes. So I was fairly happy with that. We picked up some the green in the head and the purple eye on tail and so on. And you might wonder why I was shooting at such a high ISO. Probably I might have been able, in hindsight, to get a little bit cleaner image, maybe a little less noise if I hadn't shot quite so high. But here's why, and I'll put it down to experience. But this is what I was seeing in the camera from one frame at 15 seconds. So you know, it didn't look like I was really blowing the Comet away at 15 seconds, even at ISO 3200. So I left the ISO high and, you know, shot 17 more frames just like this one. But that's what I was seeing in one frame. So if anybody hasn't really played around with stacking yet or doesn't really realize, you know, what the capabilities are, I'm not really good at it yet, but you know, that shows you what one frame at 15 seconds can become this when you stack 18 identical 15-second frames. And then the last shot is I didn't save my best for last, I don't think. But I wanted to try to capture the Comet and the Big Dipper all at the same time. And so this was the last night I had at the cottage, and but it was cloudy. Supposed to get a little clearer later, so I set my alarm and got up, and it had cleared off mostly, and the last few clouds were still kind of lingering a bit. But the Comet was still up, but just barely. It was about to set or disappear in behind these trees. So I just worked quickly to kind of capture it, but at least, you know, you could kind of see where the Comet was and the relative size of the tail, you know, relative to that huge bucket on the Big Dipper. So I just wanted to capture it with the constellation. So that was my journey on NEOWISE, and I really hope that most of you had a chance to get out and try to see it.
Thank you.
Quick question, Kirby. I noticed you used two different cameras. Can you talk a bit about why you would choose one over the other for each shot, or for one shot over another?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've got two DSLRs, both Canons. One is a 70D, which is a compact frame camera, and the other one is a 6D, which is a full frame camera. It has a much bigger chip, and so they can almost be used interchangeably for most purposes. If I want a really wide field, then I'll tend to use the 6D with the same lens. The 6D will have a much broader field of view because of the larger size of the chip. If that's not important, then the 70D would work just as fine if you're shooting pretty close up.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Kirby, I've got an older Canon Digital Rebel. I get a crazy number of hot pixels. Do you get rid of those through stacking, or is your camera just a lot cleaner because it's newer?
There might be an element to that, and you know, probably Gary and Brian might have a lot more expertise on that. I struggle with that a little bit more, maybe with some of my old Rebels camera. I think the cameras get better with each generation, so that might be part of it. You do kind of eliminate, you know, some of the noise issues when you're doing stacking as well. You know, generally the longer exposure you do without stacking, the more you're going to get into those types of hot pixels.
Okay, thank you.
Keith, have you created any dark frames?
Yeah, so I'm not very sophisticated on this yet, and so that's what I want to do next. Is I want to do a few things next. I want to learn how to incorporate in dark frames, and also how to process in RAW, because I've been doing everything that I've shown you tonight. Everything I've done in my whole life has been with simple JPEGs, and I know that the real potential is in processing raw files. So that's what I want to try to do next to grow a little bit more.
I did that once with a shot I took up on Manitoulin Island of the southern Milky Way, and I managed to get rid of the red pixels, but it turned them into black pixels. And because there was a fair number of stars up there, you could see the black. It wasn't as bad as the red, but you could see the black. It just took them out entirely.
Okay.
Again, maybe it's a matter of sophistication, and as Kirby says, you know, you learn the art.
Well, I was going to say with my Olympus, I have the noise reduction turned on in the camera. So basically, it will take, if I take a 60-second exposure, it'll take another 60-second exposure with the shutter closed and subtract it. So again, the older cameras may not have that kind of capability built into them, but that's basically like doing a black or flat dark frame every shot.
Hey, Keith, I used to photograph at a Digital Rebel. That's a common issue. It's just more prevalent with that. It's a very sensitive sensor, even compared to modern cameras, but you're going to get more hot pixels that are larger because they're larger pixels.
Okay, thanks everybody, and thank you very much, Kirby. That was great. That was, I guess we've been waiting 25 years for that, and another nice prompt. So I hope we don't have to wait that long. Okay, next is Gary Crawford, who's been taking and posting some really nice photos. He's going to share some of his work with us tonight.
Well, thanks, Randy. Let me start my sharing. Hopefully you can see that. Get it running. Yeah, so Kirby, don't sell yourself too short. You've got some pretty good photographs there. Here's my setup, and really this is sort of the difficulties you have in the urban environment. You can see the little circle here. I'm trying to shoot NEOWISE over my neighbor's chimney, and I had a sort of a window of opportunity of about 15 minutes, and it kind of worked out, but it wasn't the greatest. On the right, you can see my solar setup, and my my regular assistant there. He or she regularly sits by my telescope. He's got the run of the lawn, but enjoys my telescope. Not quite as much as I do, but it's kind of cute.
Lepus.
Yes. So this is my attempt in early July to get the Comet NEOWISE, and I was in a bit of a rush. It's not quite as sharp as I'd hoped it would be, but it was quite outstanding. I had the same problem with this bank of clouds. Whenever I went out to shoot it, there was always this bank of clouds that you were fighting with to get the timing, but it was there, and it was quite exciting. The other thing I learned was that when you're out at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, setting up for a 4:30 shoot, it's tough. I went out on a rocky breakwater in J.C. Saddington Park, and it was a little tricky walking around there. And I slipped on a rock, and I braced myself on what I thought was going to be a rock, and it was actually hot embers. And what I didn't realize is that people, when they go fishing or do whatever they do out at night, where I might like to photograph, they set fires. And I stumbled on one. That wasn't very pleasant. So I went back and took this panorama shot. This is about 4 shots stitched together, and you can see Venus in the top right. I think that's Capella straight ahead, and then NEOWISE on the left. I mean, it was so dramatic. I wanted to find some way to sort of show that experience, and the water cooperated. It was so amazing that the water was flat. I went back another morning or two, and the water was rough. You couldn't get any reflection. So everything just sort of came together. And this was the best I could do. And it was when I was shooting this that I realized I needed to get a lightweight tracker. So now that the Comet is gone, I have a lightweight tracker and I can go anywhere with it. But live and learn. When it became a little easier to see from my backyard, I thought I would try to shoot it with my D850 attached to my refractor. And I had to set up the night before, kind of predicting using SkySafari Pro where it would appear. And I got it about right. So that red rectangle is the best spot that I could shoot to, and I had to tuck my camera in the tightest corner, my telescope in the tightest corner of my backyard to shoot. And so I did get this, but Murphy's Law kicked in, and as I was shooting, you can see the clouds started to roll in, and I realized that I had just a couple of minutes to get some shots. And you can see there's the last one, and the clouds just rolled in. So all my planning kind of worked, but it could have been better. And then for the next few mornings, it was impossible to see. And I did stack this and got this shot out of those exposures. This is only about, I don't know, 10 shots stacked. I managed to take some dark frames, no bias frames, no flat frames or anything. This is the best I could do, but I'm fairly happy that I at least got that shooting over my neighbor's yards way off in the distance, but quite intriguing. Then after I got my tracker, last week we went up to the Bruce Peninsula to do some exploring, and I wanted to get a nice shot of the Milky Way. And if you haven't been to the Bruce Peninsula at night, it's absolutely astounding, because much of the area is dark sky, and I don't know if it's the whole Bruce Peninsula or just Lion's Head or some regions, but in general they have sort of this ethos of putting in, if you're putting in lighting, it needs to take into account light pollution. So the whole peninsula, I think, is sort of sensitized to the dark sky issue. And so I found this location. We were just driving around randomly, exploring. I hadn't been up here since I was 5 years old, and found a couple of likely spots for nighttime photography. So I used photo pills on my iPad and iPhone, and was able to kind of pinpoint a really good location to shoot the Milky Way. So as you heard through Kirby, that the best way to do this is take a whole series of shots. I think there's about 20 shots that I stacked. They're about 30 seconds each at about ISO 1000 with my Nikon. And of course, the foreground is all blurred when you track. So I had to make sure I took the foreground shot so that I could then layer that into the final image. And it seems to work. It's a bit tricky, because one of the things when you take the blurry foreground that happens is, of course, the blurry foreground takes up more room than a clear foreground, because things are just spread apart. And so I had to kind of nudge the clear foreground into the picture more than I had hoped, but it didn't turn out too badly. And then as an afterthought, so while we were doing photography, we were watching the Perseids. So it was spectacular. There was one near Fireball that passed overhead. And so I thought, let me just reorient my camera for a few shots and just see what happens. So I reoriented the camera for about, only 5 or 6 shots. It was getting late, we were tired, wanting to get back, because it's a half-hour drive back to the hotel. And I set it up, took some shots, and while we were shooting this, a meteor just zipped overhead and right into the frame, just what the doctor ordered. So absolutely beautiful. And for those who may not be as familiar with the night sky as some folks are, these are the main stars that were there. and I'm shooting with a zoom lens at 16 millimeters. It goes to f4, but I left it at 4.5 and seemed to do the trick. This is another Milky Way shot, kind of practicing with my new SkyGuider Pro. Went down to Kingston to visit an aunt and uncle, and so my uncle. This is a little family story. So my uncle is a World War II vet. He's 98. He's still doing extremely well. He drives, functions beautifully, and when we went to his place in Kingston a couple of weeks ago, he had all these star charts laid out on the coffee table. And it wasn't that he was expecting me. He just thought it was a good time to kind of relearn the skies. And these star charts that he pulled out were from World War II, because he was a navigator bomb aimer. And although when he flew, he said they had radar, he had to know how to navigate by the stars if the radar failed. So he did learn astronomy for navigation purposes. So he grabbed me and Vilma, my companion, and said, let's go out to the Kingston airport and look at the stars. So we went out. I packed my equipment and we went out. And with him and my aunt, who's 88, by our sides, in total darkness, just west of the Kingston airport, I just shot these the best I could. And there's my uncle, 98, remembering all the stars. Is that Antares? Is that Vega? Is that, you know, it was really an amazing moment. I also spend some of my days observing the sun, and there's been some spectacular activity lately on the sun, at least in terms of prominences. The sunspot activity is not great because it's a quiet period, but occasionally they're there, and they're fascinating to observe. In the bottom left, you can see this plage without sunspots that was quite dramatic in its detail. And something I've been learning how to do is time lapse of these prominences. And got to tell you, it tries your patience, because I try to shoot about 500 video frames every 30 seconds for a minimum of 2 hours. And you have to drop some because focus becomes a pain, and then become the long process of putting all this together. And the results are spectacular because these are quite dynamic. And then finally, like many of you probably have, I've got a project going on right now to shoot the North American Nebula, and an obvious choice this time of year. And I have a new camera I got from Steve Malia, and it's the ASI 2600, which is an APS-C format cooled camera. I can cool it down to minus 35 if I want. I'm just doing it to -5 right now as I learn how to use it. So as part of this learning exercise with this camera and its processing, I've been trying to shoot the North American Nebula. And this is with a dual band L-enhanced filter. So with that filter, I understand it generally comes out fairly pinkish. And, but it's really a beautiful object, and I've just been spending time with it. And depending on how I post-process it, I can get different versions of it. I'm taking RGB images over the next, well, hopefully I'll get some more tonight, but absolutely spectacular with the Cygnus wall, these beautiful gas formations. These dark areas, of course, are from dust clouds between us and the North American Nebula that give it this kind of shape. So you can obviously see there's the Gulf of Mexico, and I think Mississauga is about here. So just absolutely beautiful. It's a work in progress, and I'm just trying to see where this is going to go. And I don't claim to know everything about processing this. It's kind of learning as I go, but incredibly satisfying to look at this subject. So there you go.
Very nice. Very nice, Gary. Any questions for Gary?
Well, that's great, Gary. That's taken from your backyard, I assume, that last shot, right?
Yeah, my backyard, Bortle 8. I have some really nice neighbors. If I call them, they'll turn out some of their lights for me. And I share my photographs with them so they know I'm not kind of spying on them or my other neighbors. So
that always helps, yeah. Very nice.
Very beautiful work. When you were on the Bruce Peninsula, where exactly did you set up?
I'm not so sure I want to divulge the secret, but it's actually a very small neighborhood beach north of Red Bay. It's on the Lake Huron side. So about 10, 15 minutes north of Red Bay, there's this little, it's a local beach. We went down to Sauble Beach for a while, and of course you couldn't find a place to park. It was just wall-to-wall people. So we just headed up north to explore, and we found this little local beach with only about 10 people on it, and decided to come back that night. The other thing is very tempting is there's a tiny little cottage across the street from the beach for sale, and it's tempting to go look at it.
If I was to guess the beach correctly, would you scream "that's preposterous" and walk away outside of the field of view?
No.
I've been looking. There's a beach up there, Black Creek, and it's a gorgeous beach. It's in a provincial park. There's no camping there, unfortunately. But it's on that side. It's a nice parking lot. Looks like it has great sight lines. The challenge is always, if you go to a place like that, are the local police likely to hassle you? Are the neighbors likely to be an issue or problem? So the fact that you found a place that you could actually use is certainly encouraging.
Yeah, no, it was. We did see people walking around with flashlights, but they weren't that interested. And it was so dark that you could see someone walking along the shore, probably over a kilometer away with a flashlight. Just astounding.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much, Gary. That's again, that's great.
My pleasure.
Brian.
Okay. Last but not least.
That is true.
Share my screen here. Let's record. Did it work?
You got to click on the first picture, I guess.
Oh, okay. You're seeing, yeah, I'm not sure what I'm seeing on my other screen here, that's all.
We're seeing all the pictures earlier before you.
That, yeah, okay. Here we go. You guys seeing that?
There we go, yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to do was kind of give you an update this past, well, 2 months or month or so. Thanks to the pandemic and having so much extra time to sit down and watch videos by Astro Backyard and a lot of these other guys, I decided that to kind of up my game a little bit, maybe I needed to get a modified camera. Now I use Olympus mirrorless cameras, everything I've done in the past, and including this shot here. I thought I'd show this first because it's funny that Gary talked about the North American Nebula. But this was my attempt at shooting the North American and Pelican Nebula a year ago from up here. Now I have the benefit of dark skies because we have a place up here in Thornbury, which is very similar to your Bruce Peninsula skies. So I try and get up here as much as I can, certainly through the new moon and some of the dark sky weeks. And even though I don't do a lot of astrophotography, I like to get out with the camera and camera lenses or a small telescope on a tracker, like I use the Ioptron Sky Guider Pro. That's I think what Gary was using on his last pictures. So this picture, as I said, was a year ago. This was using one of my Olympus mirrorless cameras. It was stacked. It was probably about 2.5 minutes worth of data, but that was about the best I could do. And that was shooting almost straight overhead in August a year ago. I threw these in just again, since we had Comet NEOWISE, again, the benefits of being up here, and I was here in July when the Comet was out over the Georgian Bay. So I just thought I'd show this shot. Now this wasn't with the modified camera, this was with my regular Olympus camera. This is just a single 30-second exposure on a tracker. And you can see the two tails. And this shot shows you same image basically, but you can see where it was in relation to the bay. And there's a satellite trail tracking through the top there as well. But this was July 17th. Again, with a standard stock Olympus mirrorless camera. And I was using, for this shot, I was using a zoom lens, a 40 to 150. So the previous shot was at 150 and this one was zoomed out a bit. So what I ended up doing was, after all these videos, is I found on eBay a fellow that modifies a lot of cameras. And when we're talking about modifying, what we're talking about is on these DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, there is a filter that sits in front of the sensor, basically to block ultraviolet, infrared, so that what the camera sees is what your eyes see, just the visible spectrum. But what happens is most of the cameras at the red end of the spectrum, and that's your hydrogen alpha area where you get all the red nebulosity, the filter tends to cut off a bit early so that your sensor may only see 20 or 25% of that part of the spectrum. And anything beyond is cut off as well. So one of the modifications that these guys do is called a full spectrum modification. Essentially what they do is they remove the filter that's in front of the sensor and they replace it with a clear filter. So the clear filter lets in everything from ultraviolet to infrared and everything in between. One of the benefits of doing that as well is that the sensor becomes a lot more sensitive. I've read some people say about 4 times as sensitive. Anyhow, so this camera that I got is a full spectrum modified camera. And this shot was when I was out trying to catch some of the Perseid shower. I had the camera set up with, this was with a 12mm lens on it, aimed straight up. And I took a bunch of shots and never got a meteor in any of them, even though we saw several meteors. So I thought, oh, I'll stack a few of them together just to see what I've got. Now this was taken with the camera, full spectrum with no filters, no other filters on the camera. What you typically do is if you want to shoot infrared, you put an infrared filter on your lens. If you want to shoot in ultraviolet, you do that. So you can kind of control what light gets to the sensor by putting filters on it. So I'll go to the next shot here. This was still from the Perseids. This was a single frame. That was the best shot of a Perseid I got. And just down below it to the left, that's the Andromeda Galaxy. So I was facing north for these and a bit of the northern Milky Way there. Then I put on a fisheye, and this is a shot kind of showing you how much I was covering. And even with the fisheye, I wasn't picking up a lot of meteors. But again, you can see what the sky's like. This is just a single frame, not stacked. So taken on the beach right here on Georgian Bay. So then what I did, once I started to see how much more sensitive this camera was, is I put a clip-in filter into it. It's called a nightscape filter. So it's basically a wideband filter because I don't really, I mean, I could use narrow bands and I will probably try some of that down the road like what Gary's doing. But because I have such dark skies, this is Bortle 4 here. I don't really need to go to that extent to eliminate light pollution. So I'm using a nightscape filter by STC that clips into the camera body. What's nice about that is with it clipped in, I can change and use any of my lenses and use the filter with any of those lenses. So this is a shot with that nightscape filter in. Now what you're seeing is a stack of like five frames, and these are 60 seconds. So 5 60-second frames. This is looking at the scutum star cloud, and this is using a 75mm lens. So I've kind of been like a kid in a candy shop, trying my different lenses, going back and shooting the things that I've shot in the past, just to see what this thing can really do. And I kind of I like the area that I get with the 75. Now, you got to keep in mind on the Olympus mirrorless cameras, it's a small sensor. It's micro four thirds. So it's a 2x crop. So this is like a 150mm shot on a full frame camera. This is with the same lens, just pointing it at the area of the lagoon and Trifid. Again, this is 5 60-second exposures. So it's a 5-minute exposure, basically, stacked. And I stack it in Photoshop. Then I went out with my 200mm lens. So this is the same setup with the nightscape filter, same exposure duration. So I'm still shooting, and I was shooting 1600 ISO for these. So this is the lagoon and Trifid, just seeing it up closer with the 200mm lens. And again, all done on the SkyGuider Pro, which is a very portable tracker. That's M11 and part of the scutum cloud there that you see with the 200mm lens. And then this is what I got. This is also 5 minutes shooting straight up. And again, I kind of compare that to the very first shot that I showed you with the stock camera from a year ago. Now, mind you, that shot was only 2.5 minutes, where this is 5. But again, the amount of nebulosity that pops, when I look at the individual 60-second frames, they don't look too much different than this, each one of them. But stacking them, you know, eliminates noise and what have you. But I'm really pleased with what's happened so far. So the experiment continues. This is just to show you, this is the camera. So it's an Olympus, it's an EM5, and it's very small. It's a 16 megapixel sensor, and that's actually the 75mm lens that I was using for some of those shots. And then this just shows you the clip-in filter. So that little yellow filter is that nightscape filter just clipped in front of the sensor, and then I just put in whatever lens I want. And I think that's it.
Very nice.
So yeah, it's opened up a whole new world shooting with this modified camera. I did do some infrared shooting with it too, and it kind of blew me away because an infrared filter looks black, and you put it over the lens and yet the camera shoots like you're shooting in regular daylight. So it's a fun thing to try if you want.
Any questions for Brian?
Brian, with it modified like that, is there a clip-in filter to essentially put the same filter back in if you wanted to do daytime photography, or do you figure, well, this is now just...
Yeah, Alan, you can actually. That's one of the, with a full spectrum modification, I guess there's two things I would say. One, if you've got an old camera or an older, like you've got two bodies and you want to have one of them modified, there are places in Canada and in the US where you can send the camera away. And I think they charge $300 to $400, something in that neighborhood, depending on what you want, you know, done to it. But they can modify Canons, Nikons, whatever. I went with this Olympus because that's what I use for all my other gear. But basically, yeah. And then with a full spectrum modification, you can. They have what they call a hot mirror filter. And the hot mirror filter basically puts the camera back to what it what's required for normal shooting. And that works fine too.
That kind of gives you best of both worlds, I guess, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm using this camera just more for astro because I have my other Olympus, you know, which is a 20 megapixel sensor, which I use for my regular stuff. But this could be used for, you know, all types of photography with the appropriate filter. It doesn't have to be a clip-in. It can also be a thread on the front of the lens.
Okay. That makes me think that we need a separate astrophotography group to meet have little meetings like this and share ideas. And, have some of the guys with some of the members with more experience to sort of guide some of the beginners. So maybe we can do that sometime. Okay, well that's the end of the show. I do have one thing to show, and that is during the break. Thank goodness for Google. What are you seeing now?
Cloud cover categories in April.
Okay, good. Yeah, so this is Mississauga average weather in April. And as you can see, it's I suggested at the beginning that you had a 50-50 chance, and that's pretty close. So I looked to see how much data there is here, but anyway, that gives you an idea. It also says that January 11th is the cloudiest day of the year, and August 19th is the clearest day of the year. So there you go.
Just missed it.
Just missed it. Yeah. All right. So thanks all. Another great meeting with a lot of participation. Great questions. So as I mentioned, the council meeting, we will discuss upcoming programming. But if you have any suggestions, you want to give a talk, you want to suggest a speaker, then or just ideas about how often we should have these meetings, or if you would like to help organize a potpourri meeting, that would be great. We'd love to hear from you. Any questions, comments before we sign off tonight?
Randy?
Yeah.
Gila, I just wanted to say that this should have been Starfest weekend. And we're not there. And looking out, I can see a planet already through my window. And I thought if the skies up there is nice, we would have had a great evening. So
Yeah.
Too bad.
It is too bad. Maybe, well, next year, if we've got a good chance.
Yeah, Randy.
Randy?
Thanks
Yes.
for organizing, Randy.
Okay, thanks, Kirby.
Yeah. Randy Beulah here.
Yeah.
Like today I didn't have Wi-Fi for some reason. Is everything that was presented today, are you going to post it somewhere that I can see the images?
I did turn recording on, so if that works,
Okay.
then I will send the link.
Okay. And even last one, the Apollo 13, you were going to do the same thing, but I didn't see it.
Okay,
Like, how do I access that?
I'd
Pardon
have
me?
to see if we in fact recorded it. If we recorded it, then I can post the link to that as
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank
well.
you.
You're welcome.
Oh, can I?
Yes, John? John has an auto freeze on his computer today. Very useful.
Good night.
So does Alan. John.
Let's all do it, John.
John had a really important thing to say, and then
Yep. It was, can I kill my internet?
oh, he's gone. All right. Well, if he says had something important, he'll send it out in an email.
There, he's back. He's back.
Oh,
He's back.
Oh no! Yeah, I keep dropping. Sorry. If you're not a member, you're not going to see that. So lost it again, right?
No.
Oh,
Okay, you can't hear me. Okay, so anybody that's not a member, just reply to the announcement and let me know, and I'll make sure that you get the links. Okay?
Very good. Or just join.
Thank you, John.
That'd be even better.
All right, everyone.
See you later.
Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy.